Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The program will begin in 5 minutes. At this time, please move to your seats and help us to start on schedule. As a reminder, please silence your electronic devices and leave them on so you can text or email your questions for our guest speakers to the address on the screen. That's askmetna@gmail.com.
As new security threats emerge, IT leaders across all federal agencies must focus their resources to stay secure. Here are 3 trends making major impacts on federal cybersecurity. Executive Order 14028 mandates the move toward a zero-trust architecture. This transition requires an extensive shift in existing IT infrastructure to remain secure against increased cyber attacks year over year. Government agencies are tasked with the challenge of improving security and breaking down barriers between departmental silos. There's a need for increased collaboration and communication between themselves and their mission partners. With strategic planning, it's possible to roadmap, design, and implement a zero-trust strategy for any network that enables a secure, collaborative ecosystem. Executive Order 14028 also establishes best practices to secure the software supply chain, which adversaries can weaponize using similar methods as recent cyber attacks. Every component, activity, and practice used in the development and deployment of federal government software should meet these rigorous security standards and systematic reviews. Organizations must prove their due diligence toward these efforts. They're seeking vendors with ISO 28000 certification to address end-to-end risks, as well as technology partners who can assess current software supply chains and help ensure compliance and visibility. There are over 2 million federal employees working around the globe. Hybrid work and increased collaboration extends the attack surface, resulting in standardized security measures such as Homeland Security Presidential Directive 12. Structuring systems to provide visibility into where data resides, who has access to it, and on what devices is crucial to reducing the risk of data loss and cyber attacks. To develop a robust cybersecurity strategy, federal agencies need IT orchestration by CDWG. For more information, visit cdwg.com/federal.
Good afternoon, and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Before we begin this afternoon's keynote session, please keep your attention on the stage as we make a special presentation. Please welcome to the stage the AFCEA Augusta Fort Gordon Chapter's President Eric Gladman, the Strategic Account Manager for the Army National Guard and the U.S. Army Reserves, and joining him is the Vice President for Scholarships and Education, Dr. Melissa Johnson, Director of CCOE Operations for Athenix Cyber and Signet. And now please welcome Specialist Derek Ho and Specialist Jemanuel Kita on stage for the presentation of Lieutenant General Douglas Buckholz Scholarships. The Augusta Fort Gordon chapter of AFCEA awards $2,000 scholarships to an enlisted service member assigned to Fort Gordon and enrolled in a STEM, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics bachelor's or master's degree program at an accredited university. The scholarship was established by General Dynamics and AFCEA to honor the late Lieutenant General Douglas Buckholz and recognize the passion and encouragement he shared for service members pursuing technical education. Lieutenant General Douglas Buckholz was the Army's 27th Chief of Signal, and served as the Commanding General of the U.S. Army Signal Center in Fort Gordon. This year we are recognizing 2 recipients of the Lieutenant General Douglas Buckholz Scholarship. Specialist Derek Ho, 782nd MI Battalion Cyber, United States Army Fort Gordon. Specialist Ho is pursuing a Master of Science degree in Cybersecurity and Information Assurance from Western Governors University. And Specialist Jemanuel Kita, Cyber Protection Brigade, United States Army Fort Gordon. Specialist Kita is pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Cybersecurity from Kennesaw State University. In 2022, the AFCEA Augusta Fort Gordon chapter established a new Teachers Award in honor of an educator that has had a profound impact on this region. This award in honor of Dr. Sandra Caraway is designed to recognize the generational impact Dr. Caraway had on the educational system in this region, the students, the teachers, and the community as a whole. Dr. Caraway served her entire adult life as an educator, concluding a 36-year career in education as the Columbia County School Superintendent, where she served from 2013 to 2021. In that capacity, Dr. Caraway provided vision, strategic leadership, and an unwavering commitment to her workforce, her students, and the community she loves to ensure the K-12 education in this region served as a force multiplier and worthy of the Army's investment. At this time, please welcome to the stage the 2023 recipient of the Dr. Sandra Caraway Outstanding Educator Award, Ms. Crystal Davis McDowell from Greenbrier High School. Ms. Crystal Davis McDowell earned her BS in Science Education from North Carolina State University in 2000, where she began teaching high school science, and she became involved in research and curriculum development. Her family moved to Missouri in 2010, where she continued teaching high school science and served as the 6 through 12 science curriculum coordinator. She earned her MS and EDS in curriculum and instruction from Missouri Baptist University. Ms. McDowell has been teaching science at Greenbrier High School for the last 5 years and has served as the science department chair for 3 years. She has partnered with the Georgia Cancer Center to increase research experience for students and teachers and increase cancer awareness. She was one of 3 finalists for the NSTA Shell National Science Teacher Award and is a Georgia finalist for the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. She also received the Spirit of Ruth Patrick Award, presented to a teacher with a pioneering spirit to inspire others to infuse a love for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Ms. McDowell is participating in 2 fellowships this year, one for NSTA Scaling Up for STEM and another as a CDC Science Ambassador. Ms. McDowell is indeed a change agent for science education, and her passion for empowering her students to explore all that science allows is evidence at all that she does. Ladies and gentlemen, the ASEA Augusta Fort Gordon 2023 Dr. Sandra Caraway Outstanding CSRA Educator Award is awarded to Ms. Crystal Davis McDowell as a top educator in the CSRA who reflects Dr. Caraway's character, ideals, leadership, and unwavering commitment to support and advance STEM-related education opportunities for K-12 students.
The local chapter here is busy, as you can see. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Mr. Mike Jones over here, assistant principal from Greenbrier High School, and then also the commanders, platoon leaders, Captain Martinez and Lieutenant Thompson over here, who are their supervisors over here for these young men that won the Buckholz Award. That's a big deal. You know, yesterday we had a golf tournament. It was a little bit hot, to say the least. But I wanted to thank our sponsors for helping us out, because without the sponsorship of this annual golf tournament that we do every year, we would not be able to award these soldiers and also Mrs. McDowell these type of awards. We raised over $25,000 yesterday, so thank you to all of our key sponsors. Well done. This past year, because of Dr. Melissa Johnson and Miss Justine McDowell, McDonald, we increased the amount of outreach. Previously, we get about 7 to 10 applications for teachers to get, for students to get the scholarships. We had over 32 people this year, 32 students reach out to us. And it's because of these young ladies' efforts that we got the results we got. So can we give them an applause, please, Dr. Johnson and Ms. McDonald? This past year, we gave over $22,000, like I mentioned, in scholarships. $5,000 of it went to the CSRA Alliance for the Cyber Patriot Camp this year as well. As far as the STEM program for the teachers here, we've given over $30,000 in the last few years to support the K-4 through 12 grade here at in the CSR area. And another note your chapter's doing, we do lunch and learns. We do these monthly on the fourth Tuesday of the month, and I'd just like to recap real quick. We had Booz Allen was there with Brad Midary, the National Cyber Platform lead for Booz Allen. We had Colonel Garman, the ACOM for the CCOE for the cyber side. We had Dr. Bob Ross from the CIFIC, which is a Cyber Fusion Innovation Center, come brief. We had Chief Matthews, who's the technical director from the schoolhouse, brief us, presented. Bob Takoa, who presented the dark web, which I'd never seen before, so that was interesting. And most recently, the SANS Institute had 4 course authors and instructors that presented on cloud, DCO, OCO, Red Team, Python, and Linux. We had a really good crowd there, and I'd like to thank our cyber community for supporting us on that. But Miss Christine Perkapow from Booz Allen, she's our VP for programs. She's the one that deserves this, but she ran out for lunch, so can't give her an applause. And finally, I'd like to thank our chapter, our board members. It takes a lot to do what we do, and especially with AFC International. We certainly couldn't do this without you, General Lawrence, at all. So we appreciate your leadership and guidance. And all our volunteers. We have so many volunteers, and we're certainly looking for more. And we're also looking for more vendors to come brief here, do presentations for our Lunch and Learn. So if you something that's interest of you, we're putting our programs together. And I'll also be meeting with Major General Stanton to get some guidance on what we're looking to do there as well. So we really appreciate you coming here to Augusta. This means a lot, and I thank you.
Please welcome Jay Pasquesi, CDWG's Advanced Technology Account Executive for the Army, to the stage to introduce our next keynote speaker.
Thank you. Welcome to the afternoon keynote session at TechNet Augusta. I'm Jay Pasquesi, Advanced Technology Account Executive for the Army with CDWG, and we're a proud sponsor of TechNet Augusta. CDWG is a leading technology solutions provider to the government, education, and healthcare sectors. With more than 2 decades of experience partnering with and selling to the federal government, CDWG understands how evolving policy influence, strategy, and decision-making for Army IT leaders. On behalf of AFCEA International and the Augusta AFCEA chapter, I am honored to introduce Young J. Bang, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army, Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology at Headquarters Department of the Army. Mr. Young J. Bang was appointed to this role on March 8, 2022. As the Principal Deputy, Mr. Bang advises Army leadership on all matters relating to acquisition. Prior to joining ASALT, Mr. Bang served at the C-suite or Executive Vice President level at multiple mid-sized companies, large and mid-sized companies, leading P&L, building business and growth, and product development across services and product companies. From a technology perspective, he has a deep expertise in cutting-edge technologies such as quantum, artificial intelligence, deep learning, and extended reality, as well as a mastery of digital transformation, embracing modern software development, big data, cloud computing, and Internet of Things. Mr. Bang is leading the charge for the Army's digital transformation strategy, helping to brand the Army's agile journey as a hashtag Army Digital Odyssey. Mr. Bang served in the Army in various leadership positions at Fort Bragg, Korea, and Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Please welcome Mr. Young J. Bang.
All right. So I feel like after lunch, we really need a whole video, right? And after seeing that, if you don't want to jump out of a plane or do something digital, you're probably in the wrong group here, right? But I wanted to show that because a couple things. I think, Jay, thank you for the introduction. Actually, I apologize. Let me step back. Let me thank Susan Lawrence for putting this together, our distinguished guests, as well as industry partners here. You're critical for our success. And like Jay said, you can see the hashtag there, Army Digital Odyssey. We're on a journey. We're on a journey to really transform the Army, right? And everyone knows about our modernization efforts. But all of that really is underpinned by digital transformation. But more importantly, digital transformation helps us accelerate. If we really want to modernize the Army and transform the way that we're talking about earlier, we have to really be in this journey. And again, it's a team effort, right? Army people know it's always a team sport. We need to work together. We need government, civilians, military, and industry really to help us kickstart this and continue with this acceleration. So with that, you're going to hear a lot more about this Odyssey. You're going to hear a lot of references to other things, and you'll see that kind of rolled out as we're going through, but a lot of that will also be unveiled during AUSA. So hang along for the ride. Join us on our journey to really accelerate the transformation that we're trying to get through. So, here is our mission. Everyone's probably seen it, but again, I wanted to hit that tagline. I probably just took the steam away from that, but really the tagline here is accelerating success requires digital transformation. Everything that we do, all the weapon systems that you saw, whether it's the AMPV, the ISV, the RCV that you saw all over there, awesome, exquisite weapon systems that we're building. But all of that is underpinned by digital technologies. And right now, we have a lot of people that are coming up, soldiers, junior officers that were born native to this digital era. A lot of us at the senior levels understand it. We might be digitally enabled, but they live it. And we really have to get more people, educated, and we have to get more help from industry to help us really transform and accelerate. And that's kind of what we're talking about. Modernization is a given, it's table stakes. We're doing that right now. You'll see later on what we're delivering. But really, we really need help with this digital transformation. And so here, just another tag about the whole Odyssey. It's really about everything that I just said. We're on this journey. The journey is going to be multiple years in the making, right? Just like Homer in the Odyssey, right? That voyage, we're on that voyage. And we need people to join us. And it's not going to be 0 to 60 overnight. It's not going to take a year. It's not going to take 2 years. It's going to take multiple years to really change the culture, change the way that we think about technology differently. Jumping out of planes, which is cool, brag, right? I'm sorry, Fort Liberty. But we have to value the tech talent just as much as we value the tactical talent of the soldiers jumping out of the planes, right? And so it's a shift, it's a paradigm shift, but we really have to embrace that, and we really need industry to help drive that as well. So here, Army's 24 and 23. The modernization efforts that we've undertaken, phenomenal. And I think some of y'all heard before, I benefited from the Big Five in the 80s and programs when that was fielded, and we got the Abrams, we got the Apaches. That was awesome. And as you see in Ukraine, that's working incredibly well against Russia. But China's a different fight. And so what works in Ukraine will not work to the same extent that it is now in the other theater. That theater, they're digitally native in a lot of capabilities, right? They've leapfrogged some of the technologies because they didn't have to go from analog to digital, right? As they were building their tanks and their ships and their aircraft, they were digitally native from the get-go. And so the way they think about things is a little bit different. And again, that's why even though our weapons platform are exquisite, the best in the world, That won't be as successful with the Chinese, so we have to really drive this digital transformation. You'll see here huge amounts of successes in 24, right? We're delivering all of these capabilities in 23, right? You probably heard General Rainey talk about these 24 capabilities in 23. We're on target, and we've delivered most of them. There's still a handful that we're still working on, but it's incredible the speed in which we're doing that. And again, that's because it's a team effort, not just, again, us on the Army side, but it's really with industry and the partnership, and we have to continue that. Underneath that, there's a couple things on the yellow that are really a little bit more foundational for us on the digital transformation and this digital odyssey, right? You all have heard some of those before. If you haven't and somehow been under a rock and haven't seen any of those, come see me, come see Ms. Swanson, come see our PEOs, and come see our colleagues, the CIO, right? Folks down here at our cyber. Everyone understands what we're driving towards here, but it's critical for industry to really understand what we're trying to do here. And it's not just the buzzwords, right? Me coming from the commercial side, I'm always thinking about concepts, but more importantly, with implementation in mind. And we need y'all from the industry who does nothing but implementations to come and help us with these concepts. And again, for me, it's not buzzwords. I'm going to be asking, when you come and talk to me about your solutions, I'm going to be thinking about how this is going to be implemented and how you're going to help us get there. And I will ask you tough questions. If you haven't come see me in the Pentagon or out, go ask your colleagues. I will ask you and I will grill you on the technical capabilities that you have, okay? But those things underneath all that are really some of the foundational things that we're really driving from an odyssey, a digital odyssey perspective. Y'all have heard of a lot of these. I'll go into a little bit more of some of those so I'm not repetitive. Like, General Morrison said some of the feedback from industries, oh, we've heard you say that before. Well, it's important because we need you to get the message. But there's a couple other things in here, like torque. Some of you who might not be tracking that outside of Project Maven, well, you'll see more and more of that acronym called torque for a very specific reason, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Some of y'all might have heard a little bit of what we're doing collectively in the Army around C2, in the C2 space at large, right? So our partner in crime, General Morrison, has been driving the network, right? Unifying the network and the transport. It's critical that we do that. But what else? If you look at me from a technology standpoint, you'll see this later, I look at the whole stack. The network is a component of that. We have to work on all the other pieces of that end-tier architecture, and we need industry to help us. And really, if you think about that, that's not really that different. But the way that we're going to go about that is a little bit different. It's going to be through torque. Okay? Torque, I'll just hit it now. Traceability. If y'all are back in school in the Army, I would be going traceability, observability, replaceability, and automated consumption. So think about all of that in the context of the things that we're doing in this digital odyssey. Okay? There's a lot of other things that we're going to hit on. Y'all probably heard some of these before. But a lot of the things that we're going to focus a little bit on today is around security and the cyber, because obviously we're home of our cyber community who focuses on security. General Stanton, General Barrett, who are critical partners for us. And we'll also talk a couple of recaps about what we've been doing around software development. I know that General Morrison had teed up the software side. I will hit some of that. But I will hit a little bit of the data as well, but I will also talk a little bit more about the security since it's a little bit more near and dear to this audience here, okay? So if this is actually a little bit of a recap. If y'all have been listening to what the Vice has been talking about, that op-ed that the Vice and the Under actually pushed out, there's a couple things that I'm going to simplify here and summarize for y'all, and I'm actually adding to it. And you'll see a little bit later, they have 4 principles, but it's really to guide what we're doing from a digital transformation standpoint, right? So again, guiding principles, right? Y'all have heard that before. from a technical perspective. But a couple things here, and I've said this before, right? We want to stabilize, simplify, and flatten. It's not just the network, right? Network is the first part of that. Our network is complex. That's where we're trying to converge everything so we could see ourselves better. Y'all have heard that before, right? And we're doing an incredible job, especially with the endpoints, so we can actually see ourselves better and our partners can protect us better, right? But that goes beyond just the network. It's that whole N-tier architecture that we're talking about. It's the data, it's the applications, right? It's the infrastructure, it's the compute and store, right? It's all of those things, the middleware. We have to flatten all of that. It's too complex for us in our tactical environment to be able to continue on the path that we're on now. So we have to, again, literally stabilize it, simplify it, and flatten it. Some of the lessons learned, low signature, right? You've heard the Vice, you've heard Jeff, you've heard everybody talk about that. But if you think about that, you know, I'm going to tell a couple anecdotes, right? I remember being out in, I apologize, I'm going to use the old term, Fort Hood. Back in the day, CTSF, we were burning bricks before, you know, we shipped out units out to the box. And when we did that, we set up these huge CPs and TOCs that had just infinite amounts of computers, right? Okay, it wasn't quite infinite, but you get the picture, right? It gave a tremendous amount of capability, and I think some of you have heard me say when I went in there like on third shift and the NCOIC was there, he turned off like 3/4 of it and was relying on 5 systems. So we have a lot of capabilities, but a lot of these capabilities have now exponentially gotten bigger, require more power, have different signatures, and we are literally a Christmas tree when we light up. And so we have to really be focusing on more of the low signature, right? Because our threat, our peer threat in China, they can see us as well as us, arguably sometimes better. And when we go and turn on our equipment, we'll just be blaring targets for them, just like Russia is, right, in Ukraine. And so a lot of that is really what we're learning, obviously, in Ukraine. We'll talk a little bit about some of the capabilities that our PEO IEWS is already fielding this year as well as next year to help with some of that. And that's just a teaser because there's more coming. And we're going to work with the community to get us there better. Constant iterations is another guiding principle. Again, the Vice and the Under talked about that as well. But really, on our Odyssey, we're trying to get to Agile, and we're trying to get to CI/CD, right? And we're trying to break down the obstacles at the enterprise level to get there. To do what? Constantly iterate. Get more things out there faster in smaller increments, but more importantly, get the users' feedback as we're doing it, right? So there's a couple things in there, software defined, we want to move there. The data mesh, if you haven't heard me talk about it, data mesh, go Google it. I've even done a master class on data, right, to explain why we're going to a mesh. Material release, that's critical, right? So you'll hear a little bit about this, and this kind of tees up the whole open and interoperability. To get to an N-tier architecture, we have to really start decoupling things like hardware and software, right? Because there's this thing in the Army called the material release process that was really optimized for hardware. And really, that really literally takes years to go through to get approved to actually field a material solution, hardware-based, into the field. So now what happens if you have software coupled to that hardware? Even though software changes quickly, and even if we get to Agile and CI/CD like we do on some programs, we can't actually field that because it's tied to the hardware, which literally will take years to get the material release process done and approved so we can actually field it. So again, we're breaking up that process. There's a memo already that's been signed that's an easy win for us, right? That separates the software material release process and the hardware material release process. So again, hardware can go refresh at their own cycles, and software can refresh at a faster cycle. The open interoperability, right? So I think General Morrison and others talked about this. Interoperability is key, right? Ukraine's teaching us interchangeability first, and then we want to get to interoperability. But from a digital standpoint, we're driving interoperability now and open, right? So that's kind of the high level here. But when you think about what that means, we have to look at openness from multiple dimensions, right? From a technology perspective, it's easy to just go into the technology and say, hey, just make this open, which is true. We're going to do that, and we are doing that. But there is also procedural openness that we have to go and optimize or fix for us to be there, right? There's things from a doctrine process as we get there, right? You know, this is a area for me. Again, I think some of y'all have heard it, not all of y'all, but I remember going through school and learning the old Cold War doctrine. And I learned how to fight division and core, right? And in the past 20 years, we've been fighting a coin operation, brigade and below. Works great in that scenario, but we've let certain things atrophy in the process. And arguably, some of the doctrines, the formations of how to fight at that division and core level, as well as some of the technologies that went with it. I'm not going to say, but you know, if I was a betting person, I'm sure signal brigades and MI units will probably come back up in the future formations, right? Kind of like Back to the Future. Bring back some of the doctrines and then employ that with our new technologies to fight differently, right? So there's a big procedural component of how do we have to look at that augments our technology perspective, as well as the other portion here, the human behaviors, the human-machine interactions that AFC is driving right now. I think that becomes critical because right now we're just doing incrementally better. We're automating mundane tasks. Great. But how do we leapfrog that from incremental to catch up to China in this digital age? We have to really think differently. It's not just about, can I automate this process so I can watch computer vision, or I'm sorry, not watching computer vision and doing useless dirt gazing, we can have our soldiers do something else. That's helpful. But what's different is, how do we actually use this tech and machines and humans differently in the future so it's not just incremental and it's not just incrementally better, it's revolutionary, and how do we then use that to fight our peer threat, right? So lots there, but again, those should be basic guiding principles for y'all. Simplify and flatten, low signature, constant iterations, and open. That's not exactly all the same four that the Vice and the Undersay says, but it's pretty similar. And those should be guiding principles for industry to help us as well, right? And then, again, all of that real transformation. When I get fired because people don't like what I'm doing or whatever happens, we have to instill that change in the organization and the culture, and that requires people, processes, and systems. And again, not just the technology that we're really focused on, right? So really think about that, and when you come back as a vendor with a solution, I'm sure it's exquisite, I'm sure you do it better than everyone else, but think about the other dimensions of that and these guiding principles and how you're going to get us there, right? And help us on this journey as well, okay? So, here's a build slide. I apologize, I'm not as eloquent as General Morrison. I always love when he talks because he's a smart guy. I'm a technical person, so I need slides. But if you look at this is the whole notion of that whole vertical integration, right? Over the years, things have been vertically integrated for multiple reasons. A lot of it for efficiencies, for performance, costs, whatever you want to call that. And really, it's really, when you think about software, database, hardware, and network, and this is what I was talking about, how we're trying to separate things and create abstraction layers, okay? So over time, this works for a system, but now we have multiple systems that are siloed, right? Everyone knows the story. Everything is siloed because it's more efficient or maybe it's faster performance, all that. And so when you look at that, those siloed systems, maybe performance-wise, whatever, help that system perform. But when you look at it from an enterprise, it's really not scalable. And then unintentionally, right, the theme is about data centricity. Unintentionally, it locks in the data into the systems, and we literally have to perform miracles, whether it's APIs or SDKs or, God forbid, old message formats, to get into the system to kind of pull out the relevant data. It's tedious to get there, right? And so what we're talking about is, how do we actually then decouple all that, right? So you heard me talk about abstraction of the hardware and the software, right? Well, I'm going to refine that and say the transport and the network, we have to abstract that from the hardware, and you'll see why I say hardware shortly, from the databases and the data and the software or the middleware or the UI, right, or the logic, right? And we have to separate that at the enterprise level, right, to create these abstractions so that what does that do? It loosens things up so it hopefully will let us be a little bit more, a lot more easier for us to get at the data that we're talking about, right? And so you could be facetious and be like, Young, that looks like an N-tier architecture. What's different? Well, you're right, it is an N-tier architecture. But if you think about it at the enterprise level, we are trying to create these abstractions because why? A couple things. The white arrows that you see there, because we want to do a couple things. That big one there, that data is going up and down. When we create abstractions like that, the intent is to liberate the data. Not intentionally bad things that happened, again, when those things were vertically integrated. They were done for a reason, performance a lot of times, and efficiencies. But what I talked about, it unintentionally trapped the data on the back end side, and it's just hard to get. And so part of this is really to liberate that data. So that's one, why and how is this different? The lines in between the layers, the specs, right? And I think previous question that General Morrison talked about standards, and we were talking about is it standards, is it specs? Okay, y'all can come into my office and we can have a philosophical debate or discussion about what a standard is, what a guiding principle, design pattern, reference architecture, reference implementation, and all those are. But what we're trying to do is really define the pieces in the middle of those abstraction layers, right? As we pull those vertically, tightly coupled systems apart and create these abstraction layers, we're doing that because we want to get to torque. Remember that acronym I talked about earlier? Traceability, observability, replaceability, and automated consumption, right? Because you're right. If you look at that and be facetious, it is an N-tier architecture. We already have N-tier architectures. What's different is how we're going to go about it, because our intent is not to build all these layers. That's where the vendors, y'all do that way better than we do. And honestly, you spend hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on R&D to do all that, and you have business models that support you sustaining, I'm sorry, we don't sustain software, for you to maintain the software, to harden it, to do all those type of things. So what makes the Army think that we can do that better? Well, we're going to fight our wars with our exquisite capabilities and weapon platform. We're going to do that. We're going to work on concepts and doctrines that we do well, and we're going to partner with you for these layers. And that's why it's critical. But again, to prevent it from going the vertical integration route, we're going to develop these specs, and we're going to drive torque. And those are the things that we're going to define for you. So just like a weapon system, or, I don't know, Flora. We talked about digital models. Flora or Udra is a perfect example. Not only are we giving you paper product, right, proposals, which y'all may or may not like, but y'all are already investing in things like digital engineering, system engineering. You're already doing things in the digital world. Because we're not there yet, you have to convert what's in digital to paper, and you're going to give that back to us as a proposal. kind of a little backwards. So what we're trying to do is really drive that digital space, eat our own dog food. We're not going to say the digital models are going to replace the paper models or the paper proposals. We're going to use it to augment. And if you look at Flora or Udra, you have the paper base, but you have digital models that you can extend off of, and then we can actually show better traceability. We can get to products faster, development faster, and all those type of things. And that's what we're trying to do. But to get there, we have to define some of these specs. So when we create these abstractions, y'all know how to work together, product-wise, layer-wise, solution-wise, all of those type of things. So we're not going to say we're going to do this better than y'all. But what we're going to say is we're going to give you guidelines around specs so we can drive openness and interoperability. Because what happens when you do this? We talked about the data and the data being liberated. What I'm talking about then is really the next step. I'm going to throw another term out for you. Some of you have known me for a while, have already heard this, but most people in federal government haven't. We're going to really drive liquidity of the data. So if you're going to go back to this whole analog of data streams, data lakes, delta lakes, blah, 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 okay, what's the real intent of that? Fluidity of the data, liquidity of the data, statelessness. We talked a little bit about it, and General Morrison talked a little about it too. A lot of our data is perishable, right? Does it make sense to have all of this historical data for everything and then replicate it across the enterprise? No. But in certain missions, we probably do. But in a lot of what we do from a warfighting perspective, it's perishable. And what we want to do is create liquidity so the commander at whatever echelon can get access to the right information. Notice I didn't say all the data in the world. The right information through this notion of data liquidity that's liberated from the vertically integrated previous architecture, right? And so that's really why we're trying to get that. The UI and the self-service is another concept that we're really trying to drive, and we need industry's help here. The UI should be lightweight, right? Very easy. We shouldn't have whole server stacks to go accompany a lightweight viewer. Right? Just kind of intuitive when you think about it. And then self-service. We want soldiers, commanders to be able to do basic things with the data that's now liberated and that's liquid, to do queries without having to do SQL queries, right? But have self-service tools so they can get at the data, to get at the report, to get at the information that they need, because trust me, we in the acquisition community can't ever fix all the laundry list of requirements and if and dream statements that every commander is going to want. We just can't. And then what happens? And you have these huge requirements documents that General Morrison talked about, and it's not just one. Now we'll have 50 just for the network. We can't ever possibly meet. But if we actually enable some of this and let the commanders and soldiers get to self-service through a lightweight viewer, and we don't have huge stacks that are accompanying us at every formation in every echelon, well, that just makes it a lot better, because what does that do? It reduces our signature, right? We can then be more mobile and agile and fight more distributed. There's a couple concepts that General Brunson was talking about, right? If you read his article that talked about how we need to fight a little bit differently because of our heat signatures, right? And our digital signatures, right? We have to be more mobile, and we have to have those huge TOCs, huge CPs, and the ALOCs that we have now. We got to break them up. We got to have them in multiple locations. We have to rotate them around so it keeps the enemy guessing, right? We have to do things differently on the move. When we get to something like this, and we can actually literally be on the move instead of having, again, huge, exquisite server racks across all of our weapons platforms, and then we're lucky to do it on the quick cult, right? But if you think about that, and to think about these, I'm going to credit him again. General Brunson was using the term data diet. We got to get to a data diet. We got to get out of that paradigm of everybody, information is power, and I'm going to take all my data, and if you want it, great, it's going to be hard, but if you do, then you're going to replicate it, no. We got to get away from that. We've always talked about things on the network or on radios about appetite suppressant, but from a data construct, I really like that term, data diet. Hat tip to General Brunson. I'm going to use that term a lot. We got to get everybody thinking about a data diet. We just cannot afford to go down the path that we have been from a architectural standpoint. Okay. High level, right? You now see this. That's kind of where we're going. At a high level here, I just wanted to kind of, it's a Pentagon slide, right? But at a high level, people are like, well, what's the Army doing and how's it tie into the joint? How's it tie into joint fires? How's it tie into joint? Okay, I'm sorry, CJADC2, right? Coalition now. But at a high level, as we're going through this odyssey, that vertically integrated stack that we're talking about, we want to get to an abstracted layer to the right. That's kind of our 2B. But when you think about some of the things here, we have some gaps. Even on the way that the Army fights, and our community with the Jeth and the network CFT and everyone is really trying to help with the appetite suppressant with the radios, thinking about JBCP, CPCE, ABC, and 1, 2, 3. But the real gaps that we're trying to do is that we've been, again, go back to what I said, we've been fighting as a battalion and brigade. If we're going back to fighting as a division and corps, that whole notion of how do we see ourselves, we still have some gaps. And so with the ADP and the campaign of learning and the efforts that First Corps is doing with us, working out on how to figure out how do we get something at the core level so we can see ourselves at that level as well as kind of division and below. We're still working through progress, and I am happy to say we're making a lot of progress there. But again, appetite suppressant, and let's figure out exactly what that looks like so we can actually fix what we need so General Flynn and Indo-PACOM can fight tonight. That's what we're talking about. The other part of that, there's another gap. So this is how it ties into the joint. The JFN and the JADC2, I kind of equate JADC2 as the same thing as our journey where we're going to. What we're fixing now is kind of where I equate joint fires. Because let's face it, the strategic level, right? Theaters don't fight, right? They don't. There's just headquarters elements. The services fight. And we have to plug in. And so what we're saying is, as we're figuring out our gaps from a core and division construct, we're working with the joint to figure out how we're tying into the JFN so we can enable sensor to shooter to effector, right, to sustainer, that whole notion that General Rainey talks about. But how do we do that by plugging into what they're working on at the strategic level, at the theater level, so our cores, our CFLICs can plug in and do that. So that, in my mind, is about how do we fight tonight, not as just an Army, but as an Army to the joint and to the theater, especially for that Indo-PACOM area. And then as we all evolve to the right, the abstractions, the torque, the data liberation, the data fluidity, that is our analog to how, in my mind, CJADC2 and how they're evolving, right? So we got to kind of do the see ourselves, not just an Army, but now with the joint side, and how do we make sure we can do targeting and fires together? And unfortunately, some of that might be still message formats, but it's really so we can actually see ourselves and fight tonight, and then we will evolve to the future of where we're trying to get to. So that's kind of hopefully, at a high level, kind of stitches everything together for your industry to see what's the Army doing with C2 Next and C2 Fix, and how's that tying to JFN and JADC2, and what is all this stuff? Well, hopefully this kind of clarifies it for you a little bit, okay? If it doesn't, go talk to the smart people like Jeff Ray and General Stan here. A couple other things here. When you talk about Oh, now back to, now we're a little bit more deeper diving into the security side a little bit more. Y'all might have heard a little bit about what General Morrison talked about, the CPR and the network CPR. Well, there was a component of that we had been working with them around the software side to really drive CI/CD. And one of those things here are what we're calling pathfinders. So for me, I'm never binary as in this or that. It's typically this and that. And I'm never one to say, hey, we're going to do this and it's going to change overnight. There's got to be a path, a transition. We have to figure out the processes too, right? And so we have these pathfinders that are really helping us develop some of the processes so we can go from here to there instead of just saying, hey, you know, Young's at headquarters, he's going to push some paper and it's going to be some policy with nothing behind it. Okay, no. Remember what I said? I'm about implementation. And so we're trying to figure out the right processes with the policies to enable CI/CD. And so you can see the names of the ones that we're talking about. But the takeaway on here is that those pathfinders, if you look at it across the whole life cycle, we've intentionally identified projects that hit different areas of the whole life cycle, so then that way, because some of them are at different levels of maturity and in the life cycle, that way we can look in totality, the whole soup to nuts of the process that needs to change, or the policies that need to be put in place, or the friction points or the obstacles that need to be really broken down as barriers. And that's why we've outlined it that way specifically. So again, the big takeaway is we're developing a process to enable that. Now, we're doing that because we want to get to Agile and CI/CD, because we all know if you get to CI/CD, you get to DevSecOps. Sec part is critical for this audience, because we want to have that baked in while we're actually developing. And unless we get to that path, the process with the policy, with these pathfinders, we could talk about DevSecOps all we want, but if we're only doing it in pockets, or we're actually not deploying, or we're actually not getting the test community to take the results of the tests that we're already doing while we're developing, as we're actually doing security baked in while we're developing, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? And so y'all will be frustrated as industry saying, oh, we can do DevSecOps, but we can't actually implement it because you have all these barriers. Well, that's what we're trying to do with these pathfinders, right? To really enable that and really drive that. The other portion of that is the whole zero trust. I'm sure Leo will talk a little bit more about that later, tomorrow. But zero trust has to be foundational. And again, components of that we talked about, the SIEM tools, right? So we can see ourselves at the endpoints. The whole ICAM portions that we're working now at the enterprise and the tactical are all foundational table stakes. What I'd like to get to, and I've been talking to General Morrison, and I know Leo's of the right mind, but I didn't talk to him specifically on this one, but we will. I'm sure General Barrett and General Stanton will also emphatically agree. I want to get to SOAR faster. All right? We got to get to SOAR faster because, hey, great, we can have a lot of things that were worked out now that we can see ourselves better as a network. But if we see something that happens, we got to contain and we got to remediate. And if we're not automating that with orchestration, okay, that's only part of the battle. So I'd like to get to SOAR faster, right? So we can do those things, and so we're not constantly admiring the problem. We're actually able to contain and remediate quickly, again, with help of industry, so we can actually fight in a DDoS environment against our peer threats. Okay? This, I could probably spend all day talking about this, right? But if you think about this whole cycle of modernizing and automating cybersecurity, there's a couple big components on that as a team collectively, right? The CIO, the G6, the R cyber community, the G2 community are fully on board and embracing. Things like active cyber defense, right? CSSPs. I mean, we're working on trying to connect the network so we can actually enable them to do their jobs a little bit better. And oh, hey, once we do that, it'd be great if our red teams can actually persistently, or at least ad hoc, do red teaming on the network at will, right? That'd be kind of cool. Defensive overwatch and reference architecture. So you heard General Morrison talk a lot about the overwatch. I think that's a huge component. There are some things that are going to be, sorry about that industry, fundamentally a government role. But we do want to work with you to see what portions of things that aren't fundamentally a government role that we could actually have industry do for us or with us, right? And so there are some of those things that we're working on. I might as well talk about now instead of waiting. There's something that we're going to do as a proof of concept, purely proof of concept right now. So don't think there's an acquisition right now, or it's a pure proof of concept to kind of really get at exactly that. We're calling it, so from a cyber perspective, our attack vector is pretty big and expansive, and there's what I would call a lot of holy areas. Small business and academia being two of them. And so what we're trying to do is a proof of concept to say, hey, hypothetically, if we did say something like, oh, I don't know, cyber as a service for small business, how would that look? What would be our cyber's role? What would be industry's role in that space? How comfortable are industry players potentially have our government folks, our cyber teams, into your environment, into your enclave, and those type of things? We don't know. We have some hypotheses, but we want to work out some proof of concepts to get to exactly what we said. There's certain things that we're going to keep as inherently governmental in this space, but there's a lot of things that we think industry can help us with, because Lord knows Maria has tons of work that she's got on her plate and not enough resourcing to do it all. And so that's where I think industry can help us think through a little bit more creatively how to do things so we can maintain some of the functions that, again, government, inherently governmental, that they should be focusing on. Continuous monitoring and continuous ATO, those are incredible things, because if we get to CI, CD, we always talk about CI, but CD is just still a little bit of a pipe dream. If you're just deploying to your own perimeter within your own cloud bubble, okay, that's a start. There's nothing wrong with that. But us in the Army and the DoD side, we have to deploy to the DoD. We have to deploy on-prem. We have to deploy tactically. And if industry, you're doing CI/CD just in your bubble within your own cloud and your own perimeter because you can't control the inheritance of certain things, okay, that's a start. But help us figure out the hard questions around ATOs across multiple AOs and networks like John Morrison was talking about earlier. And not just the paperwork, right? We're working with EMAS and figuring out how we can actually feed a lot of the information from our software process into EMAS so we're not having to do that manually, right? There's a manual process with ATOs and all those type of things with AOs that each AO has to do. Okay, great. I'm more interested on what can we automate in that paperwork. Same thing, paper and digital, right? We want to get to digital. And how do we get to DACO? How does our cyber and cyber command have a bigger role in some of those things so they, again, can see themselves, do some inherently governmental stuff, and get to a CATO and continuous monitoring process so we can build something. But right now, there's a huge manual process for us to deploy, not entirely, but a large part with the issues with ATOs across multiple networks, right? And so we are working with the community at large, Leo as well, to think through how do we look at, what is cyber? It's about risk. How do we look at risk a little bit differently? What are we more comfortable with or not from a risk perspective? How do we mitigate some of that risk? And where can we look at more inheritance, right? And look at how can we really enable the CI to the CD portion so we can deploy on Doden, deploy different networks, deploy into theater, deploy on our tactical formations, right? All those different type of things. And so that's why those are really important for us. And I'm going to go back to the first part. secure software supply chain, right? So y'all have already heard about this before. We've put out a couple RFIs already on the SBOM. That's what we're talking about. If we want to get left of the bang, so Maria and team aren't really just hitting all of these issues that we see and all of these penetrations and vulnerabilities and all that type of stuff, we have to go left. And part of that goes back to even before left of the whole secure development environment, right? Because vendors, right, OEMs, y'all do some incredible work developing software. But let's face it, y'all also pull out from the same libraries that we do, right? I will argue with anyone, any OEM that says we never pull anything from any library or any framework. That's okay. We want you to because it'll help us get there faster. But what we're asking you to do is provide us with an SBOM because we want to secure that so Maria doesn't have now an exponentially large attack vector that she has to worry about. Let's move it a little bit to the left, and you help us with the whole lineage of your code and your code base and what you use. Again, we're fine with that, and we're not trying to get to your IP. We're just trying to look at the risk posture and how do we mitigate that and reduce the attack vector for us to protect, okay? And again, a lot of those vulnerabilities, y'all know, certain communities across the world are prolific contributors to open source or other libraries, right? And that's what we're trying to address, okay? This is just one slide with a couple words, but I think it's critical. It's like I was saying before. I am so tired of assessments telling us the same thing over and over and over again. And honestly, external agencies taking our own assessments, right, aggregating them and saying, here's what's wrong with you guys. Well, we already know that. Like we were talking about before, earlier, SOAR. I want to get to remediation faster, right? And I do think that industry, y'all can help us with that. There's some vendors out there that I saw that do a really good job helping us see where we are. Okay, take the next step. Contain it. Help us remediate it. Or give us the option to remediate it, right? Don't just identify it. Stop looking at the problem, right? So I don't know how much more I can be clearer than I'm not saying don't do assessments. We need assessments because we need to know where our vulnerabilities are. I'm just saying don't repackage it. Don't do all more and more and more without remediating. We got to remediate, right? If y'all can help us with the Congress and the budget to do that, that'd be great, industry. But really, I don't know how much more I can be clearer that remediation's got to be a focus. Assessments are good, but just table stakes. We got to stop continuously doing assessments. We got to really work on remediations, okay? So I talked a little bit about the SBOMs here. Data bombs is a concept that we announced, I think, at TEM 9 and talked about at TEM 10. But it's the same thing. Data is so tightly coupled with software and tightly coupled to the success of AI. We need to do the same thing. We're not saying we want everything and its uncle, but we want to reduce the attack vector there as well. And all you vendors that are doing computer vision algorithms, for example, tell me your data lineage. I will guarantee you there's at least one open data set that y'all are using. ImageNet or whatever, right? I will guarantee you there's poison data sets in there. And so we're not saying don't use them. We're saying help us understand your data lineage. Help us with the data bomb, bill of materials, so we can also look at our attack surface, our risk areas, focus in on that, so we can make Maria's job a lot easier. That's what we're talking about from a data bomb. And it's not about anything else than we want to understand our attack surface and reduce our risk. Which leads me to the last one, the AI bomb. We talked about it at 10. This one we're still continuously talking to industry about, and we want feedback, right? Because we're doing this, and we're going down this path for the same reasons. We want to reduce our attack surface from an algorithmic standpoint. And if any of y'all out there in the audience say, oh, that's not possible or feasible, come to my office. I will talk to you until you're blue in the face, and you can explain to me why it's not, and I will refute every point that you have. But we want to get there because we want to accelerate our adoption of third-party generated algorithms. We do. But for us to do that, we have to look at our risk posture, right? And we want to use your algorithm so we can actually catch up to China in this space. But unless we're thinking about the risk posture and how Trojans, triggers work, more than just the data, in the algorithm, in the training, and the learning components of that, attacking the algorithm itself, right? Or the process itself, all of those things. The data poisoning is table stakes. We're addressing that with the data bomb. The AI bombs are critical for us, and this is where we really want industry's feedback because depending on what we say we want as part of the recipe for the AI bomb, y'all can come back and say, well, that's basically our IP. Yes, to a certain extent. And this is where I think we want to have more dialogue because put it back in the context of why we want the AI bomb. It's not because we want your IP. And we're not going to reverse engineer it to put you out of business. Why would the government do that? The intent of that is for us to get a better handle on the risk posture of our algorithms, right? It is incredibly hard. You can ask our experts here to find Trojans in software. It's exponentially harder to find that in algorithms or the data or the process. So help us with that because we do want to implement your third-party developed algorithms, but for us to do that, we have to understand the risk better. And we're not going to be out there just saying, hey, we're going to grab this and put this here and put this on our weapons platform or our network without understanding what that intentionally or unintentionally could be a rogue agent. Because we couldn't find them because you wouldn't provide our data bomb, software bomb, or AI bomb. And so we're not saying we want all the training data, all the validation data, all the hyperparameters, all the features. We're not saying everything because arguably then you could reverse engineer some of that. But what I'm saying is, hey, you got some people in the building that understand what you're talking about from a technology. We want to help you accelerate the adoption of that, but you got to help us meet us in the middle, reduce the risk of doing that to our systems and our network, okay? And that's the intent of the AI bomb. So we want to have more dialogue with y'all. Come to our office. If you're going to bring your salespeople, bring your technical person too, or peoples, to have that dialogue because I think we're a little bit more flexible on the AI bomb of what we want to see in there or not, okay? But that's where we really need your help. And so the last slide here is about meeting in the middle. Y'all have probably heard me, the theme here, as well as heard me in the past. We need your help. Industry come in to help us, government help you in the middle. We got to meet in the middle. Let's look and have a frank discussion about risk, frank discussion about your business models, right? We want you to make money, but we want you to also look at our perspective and help us mitigate the risk, right? And we got to be a good teammate with each other, right? Meet in the middle. And I would say, I'm going to borrow this from Bob Marion, our MilDep. Be great teammates and honor your commitments. So if you sign up to do something with us, great. Good teammate. But do it correctly, implement it correctly. If not, tell us you're not or things are messed up, and we'll come and share risks together. But if you aren't upfront about it, are going to try to look at only the short term because I got a quarter in sales cycle or I got to meet this revenue target, that's not necessarily honoring your commitments, right? We need you to be all in, right? The whole chicken and the pig story. We're the pig. We want you to be part of the pig too, not just the chicken. You got to come and help us in the middle. So with that, you can see my handles on LinkedIn, Facebook, and I guess X now instead of Twitter. If you need to get a hold of me, look for Major Bono or me. If you need to get a hold of really smart people, look at Dasadas and our PEOs here. And if you need more help with that, look at our CFT colleagues and our cyber colleagues, because it's got to be a team effort. We really need your help here, okay? So with that, that's it. I think we have quick time for a couple questions. Okay.
So we've got one question for you, and it really is 3 questions, so bear with me. Yes, a data diet, but how do we stop eating all the junk food? How do we get to a prioritized list of data that weights data elements in relationship to mission? What data do we suppress and needs it to be different at echelons of command and specific for mission requirements?
So that was a complex question. So as a good technologist, I'm going to punt this hard question, right? And I say that facetiously because from a technology perspective, we can make it happen, but we need our teammates from a governance perspective to help drive some of that, right? So we have been working with the CDO, right, Dave Markowitz, with the G3 on the warfighting mission area, with OBT, now OEM, part of the whole business mission area, as well as the other mission areas from the EIEMA and others as well. Some of those are a little bit further ahead from a governance and a data steward perspective. We need to really supercharge some of that in the warfighting mission area. And that starts with the G3, but also, more importantly, that really resides with AFC and TRADOC. Between these two organizations, right, they own the ACCMs, they own the schoolhouses, they understand how we're going to fight in the future as well as fight now. They have to help us really define the data stewards, what data at what echelon is critical, right? So we can get to the data diet that you were talking about. And then from there, I think there's a lot of new tech that will help us really sort through some of that are a little bit more of the periphery, right, that aren't necessarily going to be prioritized based on that. Things like auto discovery, metadata tagging, right? Auto discovery of metadata tagging, or actually auto metadata tagging, right? So we can get at a lot of those things from a technical perspective, but I will literally punt on this because the governance portion is the hardest part to get to your point. And again, we are working with the enterprise to try to get at that. And again, I think the warfighting mission area is an area that we really do need a supercharge on that side.
That was our final question. Please welcome Eric Gladman back to the stage.
Okay. Okay.
Hey, thank you, sir, very much for being here this afternoon. And in lieu of a speaker gift, FC International will be donating on your behalf to the Fort Gordon Historical Society a donation. And we appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The next session in this room is a joint PEO panel, and in the meantime, you have your choice of several breakouts, sessions in the Riverwalk hallway and the Exhibit Hall Theater. Please be sure to join us for this afternoon's networking reception in the Exhibit Hall, sponsored by Comcast Business and Sonic Wall. Thank you again, audience, for being here. We'll see you back in here at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much.